It's good to be here. It's a nice cool morning this morning. That makes everybody feel a little better, just to have a little coolness. We're glad to have Joella with us. She had surgery this week, but it looks like that we're glad that she's feeling up at least well enough to be here with us. It's an encouragement to us when people, some of us may have used not to be here when they're all here anyway. We appreciate that. We want to remember the Ward family and the loss of Mrs. Ward this week. Also, Trudy Stubblefield, that's Joella and Tony's daughter. Her mother-in-law passed away this week. We want to keep the Stubblefield family in mind. That we were learning that Eleanor Christie has gone into hospice care. We want to remember her and those that are taking care of her. Matt Montgomery is going to have cancer surgery this week. We want to remember him. And all those, remember, and I appreciated Jimmy's prayer, thinking of Don. So we always miss Don when he's not here. I thought I heard the door open. I guess this is me hearing black. That's what Kay says. You just hear it. On Wednesday nights, we've been doing a study on the Holy Spirit. And we've had some real good discussion. That's what we try to have discussion. And when we do, we look together. And one of the things is, I think that we've realized is the Holy Spirit, maybe I should say I've come to realize, has a much more active role than sometimes I have given him credit for. Sometimes I get a little afraid of the Holy Spirit. When you think of, raising the dead with a touch or something like that, and it's not what we're talking about. But I think the Holy Spirit does have a role in our lives. And one of the reasons I'm saying this is, as we go through this, I've seen that in Romans 12, having gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, let us use them. If prophecy, in proportion to our faith. If service, in our serving. The one who teaches, in his teaching. The one who exhorts, in his exhortation. The one who contributes, in generosity. The one who leads, with zeal. The one who does acts of mercy, with cheerfulness. And when we look at those lists of the gifts of the Spirit, we can all see those. We know people that have those. And I've been thinking, a couple of weeks ago we gave a sermon on that God is the God of all comfort. It made me think of Mary Ruth, who I think has a gift for comforting people. That she can make you feel better with a smile and a hug. And that is a gift. And that we all have a gift that can be used to further the kingdom. And as we look at this, I'm asking for your participation. I've been thinking about people, as a little bit about what are our gifts. And I'm asking you that if you know, I says, well, I think this person has this gift, let me know. And I want to talk about that because I think we can utilize the gifts that we have as a congregation. And so email me or tell me or phone me, whatever you want to do, but let me know. Because I am asking for your participation in figuring out our gifts as a congregation. And I think that's not part of our lesson today. That's just something I'm asking for. I'm asking for help and participation. But when we look at the Bible, there are many different kinds of writing. A lot of times we think, well, it's just one book, God's story. It is God's story. But we have a vast variety. We do have story, and I always like good stories, and we have good stories in the Bible. And then we have, the stories in the Old Testament about battles and people overcoming adversity and just having a good story. But we also have lots of poetry, where it's in the Psalms where they talk about things in a much more imaginative language. We have parables with Jesus. We have biography. We don't read a history in the Old Testament the same way we would read one of Jesus' parables. They have a different focus, a different intent. That we have to look at what kind of writing we have to try and decide how we read it. And one of the things we have, particularly in the New Testament, is letters. As we have Paul's letters and Peter's letters and John's and James, Jude, we just have these letters. And one thing we have to realize, that these letters have an author and a recipient, and they have an intent. Now, I got to tell you that y'all probably remember that we got taught how to write a letter back in Mrs. Messer's English class. I know. That we learned how to write a business letter, and we learned how to write a personal letter. And most of us don't write many letters anymore. It's not. We just don't do. We can send an email, and it can be across the world just like that, as opposed to sending a letter. But there is a time for writing letters, and I'm going to talk. Betty Jo has a gift for writing letters. My mother had a gift for writing letters. Now I think that Betty Jo may not write as many letters as she used to, but she still writes lots of cards. I get cards from her, and I appreciate them. They're a little encouragement. That's something we don't think about, is sometimes just that letter or that card can provide that encouragement. But we have those letters now. We have a postal system. And we have to think that when we're thinking about these biblical letters, that wasn't what we had. They had a form of letters. They had ways to write them. They had ways to communicate. But they had no postal system. You couldn't go to the post office, put a stamp on a letter, put it in a mailbox, and expect it to go across the world. That didn't happen. Now, the Roman government did have a postal service. They had roads, they had horses, but that was for government letters, documents, official, nothing about personal. So if you wrote a letter, if you were in Rome and you were wanting to write a letter to the church in Corinth or something like that, it might take you months to get it there. First of all, you would write the letter. You would take a lot of time writing the letter. And then you had to have somebody to carry that letter all the way from where you were to where they were in Corinth. And then you had to realize that if you were writing this letter to a congregation, most of them could not read. And so the purpose of the letter was to be read out loud, because most of the people in the congregation would not have the ability to read. And many times the person who was delivering the letter, that you would say, okay, I want you to take this letter to the church in Corinth or the church in Ephesus, is that you are the one that's going to read it. That's part of your job. Not only do you deliver it, but you read it out loud. And it was very much practiced that this is how you read it to them. All in order to communicate. And when we look at these letters, if we look at we've been looking at 2 Corinthians, and we're going to look at 2 Corinthians again, is we need to understand that Paul was writing to these people, and he had been in Corinth. He started the congregation in Corinth. He lived there for about 18 months. And then after he left, he went back and visited them again. There were letters from Paul to the Corinthians. We have a couple of them, but we know there are others. It refers to other letters that he wrote that we don't have. And they wrote letters to Paul. And then he had Titus, who showed up and gave a report. So we have all this communication between the church and Paul that we don't have. But we know they knew each other. And we knew that they had that relationship with each other. And sometimes there are things in the letters that we know, and there may be some things that we don't know, because they know it. They don't have to talk about it. They don't have to describe it, because everybody knows it. We're still that way. We still have that kind of situation. 45 years ago, we were going to a field trip in ag class. Daddy was going to take us to Memphis to look at the cotton grading office there over by the compress. That was a good trip. I still remember that. We went over there and we looked at it. We learned a lot. But when we were going over, we had to cross the tracks to get over there. And we stopped, and the bars were down. The train was going across. We waited on that train. The bars go up, and Daddy starts across, and that bus dies right on the train tracks. And then we're waiting for it to get restarted. All of a sudden, old John Lemley jumps up and says, "It's a coming down, Mr. Messer." And the bars were coming back down on the bus. Now, we all think, it's 2 tracks. This train went by, and there's another one coming the other way. There wasn't. I don't know why those bars were coming down, but they were coming down. They go back up, the bus starts, and we have no problems. But for the rest of our lives, any one of us on that bus can look at John and say, "It's a coming down, Mr. Messer." And we all laugh. And that's all we have to say, because we know, we were there. We know the story. We don't have to tell the whole story. Even, I got to tell you, John's daughters, whenever John, sometimes they get to thinking that he's being a little overly protective or he's being a little strict, they'll look at him and say, "It's a coming down, Mr. Messer," to try to get him off of that. And because, of course, they were never there. They don't know anything about that story, but they have heard it enough that they understand it. And when we look at these letters with Paul and his congregations, they have that same relationship, that we don't get it all because we weren't there and we don't know it. And so sometimes it's hard to kind of figure out what's going on. But that's what we're going to do. We're going to read a portion of that letter today, and we're going to look to see what Paul is telling them. And sometimes he's addressing specific questions that they've come to him and they've asked him, and he wants to answer those. And sometimes they're more general. But we're going to look at 2 Corinthians chapter 2, 1 through 11. "For I made up my mind not to make another painful visit to you. For if I cause you pain, who is there to make me glad but the one whom I have pained? And I wrote as I did, so that when I came, I might not suffer pain from those who should have made me rejoice. For I felt sure of all of you, that my joy would be the joy of you all. For I wrote to you out of much affliction and anguish of heart, with many tears, not to cause you pain, but to let you know the abundant love that I have for you. Now if anyone has caused pain, he has caused it not to me, but in some measure, not to put it too severely, to all of you. For such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. So you should rather turn to forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. So I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. For this is why I wrote, that I might test you and know whether you are obedient in everything. Anyone whom you forgive, I also forgive. Indeed, what I have forgiven, if I have forgiven anything, has been for your sake in the presence of Christ, so that we would not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his design." As we see this, we don't know what this person, whoever this person is, has done. We don't know how he caused them pain. We do know from other parts of the letter that people are challenging Paul's authority, and he has to defend himself. And that he had a visit with this congregation that didn't go well. It was very painful. But somewhere in here, this one that was causing pain, the people have punished. They put him under some sort of discipline. And Paul is asking them to forgive him and to reaffirm him so that they can restore this person. And I think that when we look at this lesson, one of the things that we want to always keep in mind, that Paul doesn't say, well, that he's okay now. He has gotten down and he has begged for forgiveness, and let's let him back in. They say, you go to him and reaffirm your love for him. And when we're having controversies, because we all have controversies, there's always going to be conflicts. There's always going to be people that sometimes get a little irritated with someone else. And they have to come back together in order to have a harmonious congregation. And I think when we look at this, one of the things that Paul is saying, if there is a doubt, if you're having a doubt how to proceed, decide how to proceed always in favor of love. If there's a question, make sure that you come down on the side of loving one another. That's one of the things that I think is here. And he tells us why we should do that. One is, for such a one, this punishment by the majority is enough. It's enough. Whatever it was, we don't know what it was. We don't know what he did. We don't know what the punishment was, but we know that it's enough. And when we look at this, one of the things is why is it enough? And it tells us, so you should rather turn to forgive and comfort him, or he may be overwhelmed by excessive sorrow. It's not just because it's a good idea. And we know that sometimes we forgive because we know we need to. And for no other reason than that, just that we know we need to. There is a story about a woman, her name is Corrie ten Boom, she's dead now. But in World War II, she lived in Holland. And she was a young girl. And her family helped Jews escape the Nazis there in Holland. They got caught. And when they got caught, they all got sent off to concentration camps. And as you all know, bad things happened, particularly to young girls in concentration camps. After the war was over, after she had been liberated, she talked about forgiveness. And she went all over the world talking about forgiveness, how we needed to come back together. And one time she was in Germany giving a speech about forgiveness. And after it was over, a man comes up to her and wants to shake her hand and talk about forgiveness. And she recognizes him as one of the guards at the concentration camp. One of the guards who had done bad things to her and her sister specifically. That he had done those things. It wasn't just in general that we need to forgive people to bring us back together. This man had abused her badly. And she said, I couldn't do it. He had his hand out. And it was like, this is too much. You're asking too much, God. How do I do this? And finally, she says that I determined that forgiveness is a matter of the will. And she did. She reached out and shook his hand. And when she did, the burden was lifted off her. Not so much off him, she doesn't know, but off of her. That it benefited her. And I think that's something that we can all learn from, is sometimes forgiveness is not just for the other person, although it is here, but it's also for us. And that's one of the things that Paul tells them. I beg you to reaffirm your love for him. Reaffirm your love. And one of the things, this is a different translation, the same verse, but this is the message. My counsel now is to pour on the love. Pour on the love. I know that's not a direct translation, but I like that. When in doubt, and when you're in trouble with someone, pour on the love in order to get it past whatever it is and allow you to reconcile. To pour on the love. Which is one of the things we've been studying on Wednesday night, is the pouring on of the Holy Spirit. I think pouring on the Holy Spirit and pouring on of the love go together. Sometimes I think we think that this is some new idea. But when we look at the teachings of Jesus, we see that Peter, this is Matthew, and Peter came up and said to him, Lord, how often will my brother sin against me and I forgive him? As many as 7 times? Jesus said to him, I do not say to you 7 times, but 77 times. Because I think that many times we're like Peter, that we want to have a rule. How many times do I need to do this? How good do I need to be? How bad can I be? And Jesus says, you're missing the point. It's not about a number. It's not about a rule. It's about you loving your brother. One of the things that Jean brought out this morning in class is the gospel comes down to loving God and loving others. And she made a really good point. I think that's one of the things Jesus is telling us here. It's not about a rule. It's not about keeping a list and whoop, 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 you're done. It's about loving God and loving others. And sometimes I think we think that, that's under Jesus. But under the Old Testament, Peter was under the old law. That wasn't it. But when we look at Isaiah, it tells us, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call upon him while he is near. Let the wicked forsake his way, and the unrighteous man his thoughts. Let him return to the Lord, that he may have compassion on him, and to our God, for he will abundantly pardon. The abundance of forgiveness, the abundance of pardon. It's not just a New Testament idea. God has always been there, waiting for us to seek him and wanting to pardon us if we will come to him. Seek the Lord while he may be found, and there will be the pardon. And I think that's important to remember, that God is the same today as he was then, as he was in the Old Testament. But it's also, let's remember this. Anyone whom you forgive, I also forgive. Indeed, what I have forgiven anything, has been for your sake in the presence of Christ. So when Paul is talking about forgiving this person, reaffirming your love for him, pouring out your love upon him, it certainly helps him, because if you don't, it may be proved to be too much for him. But it's also for their sake. The forgiveness is for their sake. so that they can be reconciled to one another, so that they can have this unity together. And again, we don't know exactly what these people were doing, but we know that Paul had to defend his apostleship. And several times he had to come forward and say, this is who I am. This is what I've given for the Lord. And he tells them, I have been whipped with whips. I've been beaten with sticks. I've been stoned. I've been forsaken and betrayed. I've gone through all these things for Christ. And many times I think we have the idea that we have Paul, that happened to Paul. But it's not true to us. We don't have to have suffering for Christ. And I got to tell you, a lot of times we don't have a lot. No one's out here going to beat us when we walk out the door. No one's going to throw us in jail when we walk out the door. But that doesn't mean that there is not persecution of Christians in the world today. Back on July 22nd, there was a video came out of Nigeria. And it was a video, and there are 5 men with their hands tied on their knees, blindfolded, in a line. And behind them, there are 5 men behind them with guns. And the people, there's one of the spokesmen is on there, and he says, I think I've got it. Let this be a warning to all infidels who try and convert Muslims to Christianity, and then they shoot them. And 3 of these men that were shot were Christian. They were all involved in humanitarian aid in Africa. The bunch that shot them were the Boko Haram, which we know has a history of violence. 2 of those men were not Christian. They were Muslim. But they were working with the Christian organizations to try to get food and humanitarian aid to the people. And that was what happened to them. And we can look at that and we can say, that's evil. We know that. That is Satan at work in the world today. And then also when we look at that, the warning to all, that's a warning to us. One of the things that this congregation does is we help, we don't support, we help to give a little money to support the Mediterranean Rim Project through the Mission Resource Network, who are working with Muslim refugees to bring them the word of Christ. We've been to Greece and we've seen some of these people that have come to Christ. They're now going to school online at the Sunset School in Lubbock to bring the word back to their countries. It is happening. And these are the ones that there are warning. This is what will happen if you try to do this. And so that is what's going on. And we can see that is the work of the devil. And that's kind of easy to see. But let's also look at this one. There in verse 11 of chapter 2. Why should we forgive? Why should we pour on the love? Why should we get back together? So that we would not be outwitted by Satan, for we are not ignorant of his designs. It's easy to look at men being shot and say that's evil. It's easy to look at men being shot and say that's Satan at work in the world today. But when we look at it, that we have a controversy in our congregation, that we have some sort of conflict, that we have some sort of conflict with other people, and it causes division, we don't always recognize that as from Satan. And that's one thing Paul is telling us here, is do not be ignorant of Satan's designs. Don't be outwitted by him. That when we have division, whether it's here or with our neighbors or with our people, that is Satan at work. And sometimes that's pretty subtle. But that is the warning that we have. Let's be together. Our world tries to pull us apart every day. And sometimes it's pretty successful. We have controversies. We have bad things that happen. But I think if we reaffirm our love for one another, if we pour on the love, when we have to make a decision, whatever it may be, if we decide in favor of love, that we can overcome that plan of the devil, that we can overcome his designs. And that's why we're here today, is to be together, that we can work together, that we can provide help for one another. And that's what we want to do at this time. The Lord is offering. He is wanting us to come. He is wanting us to pour out his love on us. He is wanting to give his pardon abundantly. And we want to be here to do the same as much as we can. And if anybody has a need, if anybody wants to come to Christ, or if you want prayers, or if we can help you in any way, if you would come while we stand and while we sing.